A quiet dinner in a small town home for family members, one blood-soaked table, no forced entry, no suspects. Just a missing memory card and a secret buried in the walls. What really happened that night wasn't just murder, it was a puzzle soaked in betrayal. In the sleepy town of Fairmont, Virginia, the Reynolds family had always lived quietly, tucked away behind a curtain of secrets and silence. Their home sat at the end of a long gravel road bordered by trees that seemed to swallow sound. No one ever saw much of the family, and no one asked many questions. For years they lived like shadows, familiar yet distant. So when Harold Reynolds, the father, suggested a family dinner one Sunday evening, it came as a surprise to everyone in the household. It wasn't his nature. For the past year, he'd been withdrawn and cold, brooding since losing his job at a local factory. He spent most days sitting on the back porch, staring into the woods with vacant eyes. His wife, Margaret, barely left her bedroom. After a recent breakdown, she was medicated and fragile, often talking to herself. Their children, Lucas and Emily, were both in their 20s and had moved back home after falling into debt and trouble. The four lived under the same roof, but rarely spoke. That Sunday felt different. Margaret had cooked. Lucas brought home a bottle of red wine. Emily set the table with the good silverware, something that hadn't been used in years. There was even soft music playing from the living room, it seemed, for a brief moment like a normal family gathering. But beneath the surface, every person at that table carried something heavy. Regret, suspicion, anger, resentment, and maybe even fear. Neighbors would later say they heard laughter around 7 p.m., followed by the low hum of conversation. Nothing seemed out of place. But after 8:30, everything went silent. The house, which had been lit and alive, suddenly became still. The curtains remained drawn. No one took the trash out. No one walked the dog. The once vibrant sounds of dinner were replaced with an eerie stillness. Days passed. The mailbox filled with unopened letters. The family's dog, usually noisy, wasn't barking anymore. A coworker of Margaret's grew concerned when she didn't show up for a scheduled appointment and couldn't be reached. That's when the call to the local police was made. No one knew then that behind those drawn curtains, an entire family had already been wiped out in a matter of minutes. It was just after 10 a.m. when 2 local officers arrived at the Reynolds home for a routine wellness check. To them, it seemed like just another call, probably a misunderstanding or a family simply out of town. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. The cars were still in the driveway, the porch light was on, and the lawn had been recently trimmed, but when they knocked and no one answered, unease started to set in. They circled the home, peering through windows. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. A lamp still glowed softly in the hallway, and the dining room table, clearly visible through the blinds, was set for 4. But what drew their attention was the distinct foul odor leaking from the cracked kitchen window. It was sharp, metallic, and unmistakable. Every officer who's ever seen a crime scene knows that smell. Death. They entered the house through the back door, which was unlocked. The moment they stepped in, time seemed to freeze. The stench was overwhelming, and the silence was heavier than any words could describe. Then they saw the dining room for chairs, for plates, a half-eaten dinner, long gone cold, shattered wine glass on the floor. 3 of the Reynolds family members, Margaret, Emily, and Lucas, were slumped at the table, each in a pool of blood. The wounds were brutal. Margaret's throat had been slashed. Emily had suffered blunt force trauma to the side of her head. Lucas had been stabbed multiple times. The father, Harold, was found in the kitchen, lying on his back, his skull shattered beyond recognition. Blood trailed across the tile floor, as if he'd been trying to crawl away before the final blow. His fingers were broken, twisted as if he'd tried to fight back, but there were no signs of a struggle anywhere else in the house. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no missing valuables. Everything was eerily clean except the dining room. It didn't look like a robbery. It didn't look random. It looked personal, intimate. Like whoever did this sat with them, ate with them, knew them. And then came the most disturbing discovery. a small hidden security camera under the table, still blinking, but missing its memory card. The one thing that could have shown what really happened was gone. The crime scene at the Reynolds house shook the community, but the investigation was just beginning. As detectives began to piece together what might have led to such a calculated and brutal massacre, they quickly realized that something wasn't adding up. The positioning of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, and the lack of forced entry all hinted at something far deeper than a spontaneous act of violence. The police brought in forensic experts and spent days combing through every inch of the house. Bedrooms were searched, closets emptied, and cell phones were analyzed. Still, no motive was clear. But then, during a routine check of the basement, one officer noticed something strange behind a tall, dusty shelf. There was a slight draft coming. From behind the wall, what they discovered was a hidden compartment, small and claustrophobic. Built into the basement's foundation, inside was a collection of items no one could have expected. Dozens of newspaper clippings covered one wall, each pinned in perfect rows. Every article detailed missing persons cases, unsolved murders, and abandoned children stretching back over 20 years. Every victim's face had been marked with red ink, circled and connected with thread like a detective's war map. At the center of this chaotic web was a single name: Harold Reynolds. Investigators were stunned. Till then, Harold had appeared to be a failed factory worker, a quiet and passive man. But hidden in the walls of his home was a dark obsession. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more damning evidence: fake IDs, burner phones, and old maps with red X's marked in various states. But perhaps the most chilling find wasn't. It's Harold's doing it all, in a box labeled private. Detectives found a journal written in a different handwriting software, more delicate. It belonged to Emily, the daughter. The pages revealed her growing suspicions that her father was hiding a terrible secret. She believed Harold was involved in at least 2 cold cases victims he had known personally before the family even moved to Fairmont. Emily's final entry was dated just days before the dinner. She wrote that she had found something she couldn't ignore, that she planned to confront Harold that weekend, during their first real family meal in years. But she never got to. As the investigation into the Reynolds massacre intensified, detectives faced a growing storm of public pressure and confusion. The secret room in the basement had painted Harold Reynolds as a possible serial killer hiding in plain sight. The evidence found behind the wall told one story, but the forensic evidence from the scene began telling another. It started with a closer look at the murder weapons, 3 of them in total: a blood-covered kitchen knife, a rusted hammer, and a pair of broken wine bottles. All were wiped clean of foreign prints. But using advanced DNA techniques and fingerprint analysis on the grips and shards, forensic analysts uncovered something shocking. The prints on the knife didn't match Harold. They matched Lucas, his 26-year-old son. Even more disturbing, Lucas's fingerprints were also found on the hammer, the same one used to bludgeon Harold to death. The crime scene had been messy, but now the story was beginning to unfold. Harold wasn't the first to strike. He may have been the last to die. Investigators re-examined Emily's journal. Her suspicions about Harold were valid, but someone else knew more. And that someone was Lucas. As detectives dug into his past, a pattern emerged. Lucas had quietly hired a private investigator 3 months before the murders. Through this investigator, he had learned disturbing details about Harold's life before Fairmont. In particular, the disappearance of his biological mother, officially ruled a suicide, but with no body ever recovered. According to the PI's report, Harold had moved multiple times under different aliases. Lucas had uncovered it all, but kept it to himself. Detectives began to wonder, was the dinner an ambush? A trap laid by a son who believed his father had killed his mother. But another theory began to rise. Emily's death had been brutal, her injuries far more vicious than the others. Detectives believed she may have planned to expose the truth herself, threatening Lucas's plan. Did he silence her before she could speak? Then came the most chilling discovery yet. Pinned to the back of one of the newspaper clippings was a handwritten note. Just 7 words scrawled in ink that matched Lucas's journals. One monster made me, the other made me act. The investigation, which began as a search for a killer, was now a search for motive. And the deeper they looked, the more it became clear. Just when investigators believed they had uncovered every dark corner of the Reynolds family tragedy, fate delivered one final, devastating clue. It was a month after the case had been closed. Ruled a family annihilation carried out by Lucas Reynolds. The house had been sealed off, the town still shaken, and the media had moved on. But 60 miles away in a rusted-out storage facility, just off a deserted highway, a janitor cleaning out a unit that had gone unpaid made a strange discovery. Inside, a torn cardboard box labeled XMAS Lights. He found an electronic device, a small black security camera memory card, still intact. Tucked next to it was a receipt for the camera itself, purchased just weeks before the murders.
Ow.
The storage unit had been rented under a fake name. The payment method was traced back to one of the burner accounts found in the Reynolds home. Without a doubt, it belonged to them. Detectives rushed the footage to their digital forensics lab. What it contained would not only reopen the case. The footage began as expected, the Reynolds family sitting around the table, a rare and quiet dinner in progress. Wine glasses clinked. Soft music played. At first everything seemed normal, but as the footage continued, it captured the tension simmering beneath the surface. Emily shifted uncomfortably. In her chair, Margaret kept glancing nervously at Harold. Lucas sat stiffly, barely touching his food.
Dad.
Then Emily leaned toward Margaret and whispered something inaudible. At that moment, she reached under the table, most likely activating the camera. Suddenly, Harold stood up. His face was red. He was shouting, though the audio was too distorted to capture his words. Margaret stood too, pointing toward him, her body shaking. Then, without warning, she rushed toward the kitchen and returned holding a hammer. Emily grabbed her arm to stop her, and that's when everything fell apart. The footage cut out seconds later, but not before capturing a glimpse of Lucas, his eyes filled with panic, not rage. He stood over his father's broken body, tears pouring down his face, clutching the hammer that ended Harold's life. In the end, it wasn't a premeditated murder. It wasn't a ritual. It was chaos, pure, tragic chaos. Each person believed they were stopping a monster. Each of them became part of the nightmare. The truth didn't fit in headlines. The case was closed, but the questions never stopped. Because when a family collapses under the weight of secrets sometimes, no one walks away innocent. One camera. For deaths. And the truth that destroyed an entire bloodline. Is it justice? Or revenge disguised as survival? If this case haunted you, subscribe for more twisted stories that never make the headlines. Because in true crime, the quietest families hide the loudest secrets.